not have a little fun? If we're communicating via the internet, I may as well bring the internet into my classroom. Um, so, little Rihanna featuring Drake to wake us up in the morning to talk about work. I started on the wrong slide. Um, Hi, how are we doing? So, a few things. Today's lecture is going to be about the kind of introductory terms or introductory thinking more than introductory terms for what the objective of specifically this first section is going to be. And this first section is obviously looking really closely at this book, Olav Veltius's Talking Prices, and how money is involved in the conversation. Now, money is really boring and money's necessary to do all the things that we want to do, and so it's a necessary thing that we have to engage with, even if it might be regarded as boring, but that's life. So we're going to talk about that first, and today's part one of that, and then we're going to move into the other topics, rebellion essentially, or political protest work, and then into ghost stories. So the juicier bits are coming down the line, but it's important that we start off by talking about kind of get us all on the same page with this thinking. And that's why I really like this Olav Veltius book, because not only is it a very calm, collected presentation of facts, but it is also it's trying so hard to focus on the financial constraints or the commoditization of works of art or artistic production that he needfully brings up other ideas of how we emotionally link ourselves to these objects or how these objects convey meaning to us. But he really doesn't want to harp on that. He wants instead to focus um, on well how the money side of stuff works, because largely that's the stuff that art historians, cultural anthropologists have decided willfully to avoid. Excuse me. Now we are talking about value as a system, because everything can be systematized if there's at least one repeating function. And so the repeating function is at a certain point, someone's going to take this, and then someone else is going to say, I have money, take this money. And then they're going to exchange. I should have had money in my hand so you could see it. Um, I don't know where my wallet is, so whoops. But anyway, that exchange, that moment when a thing gets associated with money, and all of a sudden that thing can become a free agent. The association of money untethers this from potentially untethers this from its more ritualistic or emotive base. And that's what we call the commoditization process. It's the moment when the commodity becomes a commodity. And farther down the line, when we talk about how things actually function, we will talk about that moment in the object's life where it becomes commoditized. And we're going to look at a really fantastic text by Igor Kriptov. Kriptov. I always butcher his name, and I'm really, which is shocking because I've taught him for so long. And funny enough, he's actually referenced in this book. The article you will read is brought up in Veltius. So that's the loops of research. At the end of today, I will talk a little bit about Venn diagramming and how to take the Venn diagram from the drawing you submit to me. Probably already by the time you are seeing this video, you submitted it. If you haven't, turned it in. But how to turn that from that drawing into an annotated bibliography for your research paper. That's coming down the line. Sit tight. So value as the system is our conversation, and so the first thing we need to establish is that value is a system. There is a system of whether monetary exchange or emotional value or historical value. We have cultural systems in place that we negotiate this idea of value within. And we're going to see different registers that can be calibrated with. Um, this first one is the economic register. The second one is going to be the antagonistic register, and the third one is going to be the historic or the kind of influence register. Um, those will have different names uh, at a certain point, I imagine. So, um, so that's that. Those are the three things, and so value is going to be the thing flowing through all of them. How do we value stuff? And value is the point of it being the title of this class is because it's really vague, and B, in that vagueness, it incites a certain kind of emotional response. And I like the word value because, unlike, say, a word like truth, which has a little bit more of a fixed meaning, or um, even something like up versus down have fixed meanings, value is almost like a work of art because every person has a different way of articulating what the definition of value is. And it could be on one of the three registers that we examine in this class, or it could be on entirely different registers that are just too, that aren't, we don't have time to talk about, basically. Um, uh, yeah. So let's get into this. The two realms, we'll call them, or options that Olav Veltus outlines in really early in the text, and he'll go back over them if you haven't made it into the successive chapters of that text yet, or if you're working your way through it. He talks about hostile worlds and as it compares to the idea of the nothing but model. And these are two terms that I think are going to be good for you to have in your back pocket, especially as we move towards the New York trip and we're in New York and we're looking at this stuff, and subsequently when we're in London looking at this stuff as well. Um, the You should know that the impetus for both of those trips is very different. You're not going to London to study the art market the way that we're going to New York to look at the art market. Very different trips, so don't think that you're going to see this thing again. But it's going to be really interesting for you to see how you can, from your position, identify hostile worlds versus nothing but in March when we're in New York City, and how that might compare to the arts cultures that you are living around if you aren't living in Portland, or if you are, where you might go home to between the end of our May term and the beginning of the summer intensive, and also how it relates to London and what's going on in London. You're going to be in similar institutions in all of those places. You're going to be in galleries, you're going to be in artist studios, and you're going to be in museums um, and and art fairs. We're not going to go to artist studios in New York at this point yet. Um, we're going to be doing fairs. That's studios is London. Um, so you're in the same places, and so you can see how these examples are articulated in those different cultures. And every culture is going to have a slightly different thing. But one of the things that I find really interesting is the model that Veltus defines as the hostile world um, is actually the one that Terry Smith brings up in his article in Artforum. That's the New York he's defining. It's not the nothing but, it's the hostile worlds model where there's two butting heads of priorities that are where there's friction, and that friction actually generates a kind of capitalist foment where they only want to buy, right? Um, so that's the hostile worlds that he defines in 1974. And as somebody who's seen a lot of contemporary artwork, I actually think that that's the model that is the most pervasive in what we will refer to from now on as the international art world. The international art world is these little clusters of galleries that are white cube spaces. They are um, near to moneyed sources. There's always that, what Clement Greenberg defined as the golden chain between the avant-garde and capital, that exists in this international art world. And it exists as kind of a transnational body. So basically, you're going to see institutions in New York City and, let's say, institutions in Montreal, if you go to Montreal over the summer, or in London, and they're going to look almost identical. And you're going to start realizing that they are really identical, except, well, for lack of a better term, the accent might be different. So you'll see the white cube, you'll see the exact structure that is there as part of the running of the White Cube in both New York and London, but in London it's going to be slightly different than it is in New York. Now, the nothing but model is one that is, I think, it's very analytical. The nothing but model is the one that I try to have, I kind of aspire to. To a certain point, I do think it is a bit aspirational. Although there are really nice examples in this text about it, it just seems like the more idealized version. And maybe I'm just a jaded old man in the art world and I think it is all hostile, but that's just me. So it's going to be interesting to have conversations with you, specifically in places like New York or London, or let's go to Montreal, um, uh, and about these things, about what we see as being there, what's present. So keep these two words in your back pocket, define them for yourselves if that would be beneficial for you, that might help for you to really kind of understand, even as you're reading Talking Prices, okay, this is what these are the requirements for Hostile Worlds versus the requirements for Nothing But. And then you can take those requirements, whether they're written down or not, into your experiences in the art world at large to see, okay, that element of the Hostile Worlds is in that space, that element of Nothing But is in that space. I have this artwork that I really cherish. Do I want to put it over there or do I want to put it over there? Now, that decision that you get to make is the main impetus behind this entire course. It's really, really important that people who make things understand what they're going into, not them themselves, because you know what you're putting your body into. Generally, you're putting your body into your artist studio and you're making, work, right? Um, but the thing you make has to go somewhere at some point. You have to birth it out, as it were. It has to get out of your studio. It has to get into the world on its own legs, on its own accord. But and there are some parenting metaphors in the Talking Prices thing as well. As that person, the steward of this work, this thing you've made, you have to be a little bit more in control of what your aspirations for its performance are. And so while last term we were talking a lot about your person, your position, all the stuff you bring into the studio, this class is going to be about taking that position and making decisions about where what's in your studio goes. Now that brings us to this word, entrepreneurship. I'm going to take a drink of coffee. I'm back. Entrepreneurship is a word I don't think I need to define for any of you. We live in a society where entrepreneurship is one of the most rewarded aspects of character traits, habitus of people in a capitalist society. If you are enterprising, the world is up for you. It's your oyster because you have to be enterprising in order to afford oysters. Now, entrepreneurship as it relates to artistic practice, for a lot of people, it's a no-brainer. I'm getting my MFA so that I can make work that I make and I sell and I reap the benefits of. That's obviously not what everybody who gets an MFA is thinking, but somewhere in the back of your mind, I know that you want to make things, and it'd be really, really swell if you made cash from the things that you produced, right? All of us want to do that. Wouldn't it be wonderful? But there's a lot of work that you have to do in order to get to that point. It's crazy how influential Rihanna is. So entrepreneurship is really, really important. It's rewarded, but like every word that we use, we get to come up with our own definition of it. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, one of the things that I would really, really stress is health. So side note for personal health. Give yourselves time when you need time. Give yourself sleep when you need sleep. There is a moment when you have to work all the time. There's a moment where all of the pressures of the world are falling on your head and you have to hold them up. And there's a time when that's not going to be the case. You might be imagining a future moment when everything's going to fall on you, but there's going to be a moment when you can actually relax, when you can take a deep breath, and you can really privilege yourself, your personhood, your individuality, your brain. This is the thing that so many people don't value when they start entrepreneurship practices. Their self becomes secondary to the entrepreneur that they are developing. I understand that this is the hardest thing for us to actually turn into practice. It's something that every single human I know is still negotiating. How can I balance my work life and my life? And if you're working for yourself, oh my gosh, where is the border there? There is no border. I'm always working. I do not have a life. Don't do that. It's not worth it. When you know when you're under that pressure and you have to perform and you have to get all of this work done, which you do during these terms, do it. This is the time when you put yourself under pressure. This is the time when you sacrifice a little bit of sleep for the sake of getting that work done. But after May 7th, I know that's not your date. Your date is May 1st, maybe. Unless you're coming to the thesis defenses, which if you're in Portland, I highly recommend you come to them. But my date, the date when all of our stuff ends, is May 7th. So between May 7th and the beginning of the June intensive, I know that I'm going to be stressed out about what's coming down the line for the summer, but I'm going to make the decision to give myself time off, to give myself space to sleep, to give myself space to read books that I want to read. You have to do this yourselves. That was 3 minutes of me explaining to you how to stay healthy, because we all need that help. And we all need that reminder that sometimes sitting down or going for a walk in the woods or going to the beach is actually what you need to be doing. And I mean, the beach, the beach, the beach. Oh, the beach. Okay, so the artist is maker, craftsman, craftsperson, and in the workshop. So you become your own business. You get it. You know that's what you do. Now, what this is going to be really quickly is just kind of a timeline that gets us to a point where we are today. So every artist is an entrepreneur because every artist as a maker has some sort of workshop, and that workshop generally at least one point in their career becomes the place where a sale happens. So it becomes their livelihood, right? Their place of business. They're the entrepreneur in their studio. Now, in the 1500s, actually, hang on. This book, The Changing Status of the Artist. The role of the artist has been in flux forever. I'm currently teaching an undergraduate class, the Art History 101 class, which is such a wonderful reminder of the various ways that we human beings have been interested in making things. Because I'm lecturing on like cave painting and Roman vases and all that stuff. And so there is the continuity that humans have used these guys to make things by manipulating material. Like, it's what we do. And that said, the professional side of that, the side of that turns what you make into a house that you can live in, or food that you can eat, or stuff to burn so that you're warm, has shifted over time. Now, the artist as maker is the thing that we can all identify. We've been makers since the Paleolithic period. Um, Now, in the Renaissance, one of the first art history books came out. It's called The Lives of the Artists, and it was by a guy named Vasari. And Vasari is the, how do I say this? He's the reason why we ascribe the word genius to artists. He wrote about the lives of the artists in and around the Italian Renaissance, and he's writing just at the tail end of it. And so he is picking up the narrative that all of you were taught in art history lectures, that all of a sudden there was a guy named Cimabue who figured out perspective, and then that began the trajectory of Renaissance painting with illusionistic depth. If you didn't know that was a thing, that was a thing. You should know that that was a thing. I really hope you know that that was a thing. Cimabue. It was Cimabue, and then there was Giotto, and then all the rest of them. So the way that Vasari wrote, because he's writing in a very religious time, he's writing in a moment when the majority of art that was being produced and recognized, because there's lots of art being produced all the time, but the art that was esteemed, that was venerated, was stuff that was made for the church. And in order to make stuff for the church, you had to be a really devout person. And so Vasari saw this as being connected. He then decides that in almost all of all the lives that he writes down in this book, all the biographies that he produces, all of them involve some moment where the artist is quite literally touched by God. And that touched by Godness becomes genius. Like from 1500 till now, the idea has stayed relatively unchanged, but we've become more secular, and so we don't want to say that that person has been touched by God. We instead say that they are blessed in some sort of capacity, even though blessed is it has religious associations. And so we say that person is a genius, as in that person's talent comes from a place that is outside of their control. It's not training, it's something else in the ether. Um, and for those of you who have had longer conversations with me about this stuff, you understand that I think it's it's total bullshit. It's crazy how silly that idea is, but it still is part of us. And that's why I'm using, instead of bullet points, these little plus signs, because today entrepreneurship is the banner that a lot of our artists are performing under. Whether or not they know it, they are entrepreneurs, because writing a grant for yourself is an entrepreneurial practice. But it's the entrepreneurship, and then we add the maker in, we add this idea of the genius, because that hasn't gone away. We add in around the kind of post-Enlightenment period, this idea of the avant-garde starts to pop up. Genius is taken and turned into a social class. Instead of it being individuated as one person having the miracle of a conduit between a higher power and their body, it turns into a group of people that have the ability to have that connection. We're all geniuses, and all of us geniuses now, not only are we geniuses, and isn't that rad, we're geniuses, and it is our responsibility to move culture forward. I put that in quotes because it's a progressivist agenda, meaning it imagines that there is a better future, that what's happening next in human history is going to get better. And it's going to get better because we're going to make it better. We, the artistic genius circles, the avant-garde, we are the advanced guard. We're the first ones on the scene. We're the ones who are going to pull all of culture on our back forward towards this end goal, which is the future, only to then see that there is another future farther down the line, and a subsequent avant-garde will come and pick that up and move forward. And so all of this entails making, all of this entails a personal kind of presentation of self, an entrepreneurial self, but it also entails a certain kind of ego. The avant-garde artists, if you refer to yourself in the 18th century or the 19th century or even the early 20th century as being of the avant-garde. It actually doesn't go back to the 18th century. That's 1800 or so. It doesn't go that far back. But you thought that you were all of those things. You thought you were the cat's meow. You thought you like invented the world, and you kind of did, because art was not challenging itself in a certain way. So if you get together with a group of people and you make expressionist artwork in 1910 and you realize that no one else is making that kind of work, and you show it to people and they like it, and other work begins to develop around those ideas, you're going to think you're special. It's what happens. When you become influential, your ego inflates because cool, and people are listening to me. It's working. Something's working. And that working added to their idea that they were geniuses because they were making stuff, and so that was part of it. And so all of a sudden, the genius had a colleague, and that colleague network became the avant-garde. The artist becomes a capitalist in the post-Salon Europe. What does that mean? I thought that artists as makers were always trying to sell their stuff. Well, artist as capitalist is a little bit different. The artist as capitalist understands how capitalism works. And in the post-Salon Europe, meaning after, say, 1860 and change, 1870 is when most of the history books will say, like, this is when this begins. I always clock it back about a decade because I want to incorporate somebody like Gustave Courbet, who was very much a capitalist, knew how capital, in the infancy of the idea of what capital was, because Marx is publishing that in 1814, and Courbet is making work in 1850. So they're new ideas still, but Courbet got it. Now, what did Courbet get? And I'm deliberately keeping all this information up here for you and just talking at you because I don't want to give you a bunch of slides because I'm going to do that over the summer. The artist realizes that, okay, I can show my work to people, or I can show my work to people expressly to sell it to them. Instead of to show that I'm a genius, instead of to show that I make stuff, instead of to show that me and my buddies have this little reading group that we call the avant-garde, I just want to have a solo show and I want to sell you stuff. And this notion is something that art historians decide to not talk about, because to say that Claude Monet was thinking about selling works makes it less of this kind of subtle, sexy narrative that he was just really interested in light. I mean, totally, guy was interested in light. He looked at light. He really liked light. He wrote about light all the time. He's writing letters to all of his friends about light all the time. He's so invested in light. But he also has an art dealer who comes over to dinner, who has conversations with him about how to sell his work, who tells him, I need 10 paintings from you in the next month so that I can sell them for you. And Monet was very, very attuned to this system. And he's the generation that followed the Courbet, which was kind of, I think, again, the first burst of a capitalist artist. Now, again, all of these things are stacking together. In the post-First World War, art becomes more socially minded. That's because the capitalist fallout. The world went to war. That means the markets close, which means it's hard to buy and sell artworks. Now, there was a lot of art sales that were going on through the First World War. So it's not to say that, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Rather, the market for contemporary work did dry up. The market for older, more esteemed work did not. That stayed pretty rampant because essentially people were in debt because of the war and they had to clear out a lot of their holdings, including some of their families' holdings of art. And so the art market developed around the First World War, or continued its development around the First World War, kind of unchanged. It just switched. If there was bombing in Paris, they would hold auctions in London. And I'm being totally serious. That happened. So in the face of this, as the contemporary market kind of falls out, artists become more socially minded. This goes back to that idea of them being part of the avant-garde. They're in this group. They're with other people. They're hanging out with everybody. And so they begin to realize that we can share, and sharing becomes big. And so art becomes less monetarily focused and becomes much more about having a communal table for people to kind of sit at and engage with. Um, all of these things are um, trends that will repeat themselves in our contemporary day and age. When the contemporary market dries up a little bit, the older market doesn't. And when that cools down, this thing heats up. It happens all the time. Now, in the post-World War II period, the artist becomes the consumer. This is different than the artist is the capitalist. Now, certainly the capitalist artists of the post-Salon period bought things. Monet had a very nice house. A lot of the people, I mean, Pissarro had like 7 kids and 2 homes, I think. I mean, they like lived a nice life. But the artist as consumer comes out because their work changes to reflect the consumption of the world around them after the Second World War. So they're socially minded, and then all of a sudden, all this advertising stuff pops up, and their mind begins to change. The way that they relate to the world and the way that they relate specifically to the world of money and information shifts. And that's where we get back to pop art. Or that's where we get to pop art through a reflection of early practices of these things, like the avant-garde and the capitalist. And then in the post-1989 period, we have the artist as producer. Now, what does that mean? Well, production means something different than making. Making implies like actually using your hands to manufacture something. Manufacture, handy making, right? That's what manu translates, right? Mano y mano is hand-to-hand combat. It's not man-to-man combat. For those of you who don't know Spanish the way that I know Spanish, which is I don't know Spanish. A little bit. Un poquito. The artist becomes producer because they begin to realize, okay, as the entrepreneur and as the person who's making decisions, I'm going to make decisions that incorporate other artists. I'm going to bring people in to help me, like fabricators, artist assistants, which actually was a mainstay through this whole thing. Every artist throughout history has had an assistant. Even the ancient Greek carvers had assistants. So they become producers because they begin larger scale productions that they see as something bigger than what their 2 hands can make. So this goes into them being consumers, but also into them having that big table where everyone's welcome. This is where artists become a little bit more like film directors, where it's not the film director that's necessarily holding the camera. That's the cinematographer. The film director is telling the cinematographer where to point that camera. And so all of these things total together equal a postmodern artist. When you're an artist who is aware of the history of manufacturing, when you're aware of that the loose signification of the term genius, when you know never to refer to yourself as the avant-garde, when you know the benefits of being a socialist and the benefits of being a consumer, and all of it is to reflect back and to make some stuff again, whether or not you produce it, that equals a postmodern artist. So, all of this is to say the obvious, that we are all in the postmodern period. So, what do we do now? We talk about who's inside and who's outside. So, who's on the inside and who's on the outside? This is important when we reflect back on Terry Smith's text, right? The provincialism problem. The provincialism problem. Provincialism, regionalism, however we want to term it, is still a conversation, obviously. When I moved to Maine, it was a big part of the conversation that I had with people, was like, oh my gosh, you're like gonna go meet regional artists. And then I would ask them, isn't New York a region? And they would say, yeah, but like we're in the international art world. And I would say, yeah, but if you like take all of the little white cubes that are throughout the world and you add them up, you're really not going to get that much more than, say, like Manhattan, maybe Brooklyn. There's a lot of galleries in the world, but they can be in buildings. Not that many. There's not that big. It's not that big. And so this idea that the international art market is against or other than the provincial, I think is a little bit of an erroneous labeling system. I don't buy it, basically. I think it's kind of crap. It doesn't make sense that we can say that that work is of a place and therefore is regional, and that work is of a place and therefore is regional. It means the exact same thing. So um, everybody's provincial to something else. Now, I know that's not the like correct definition of provincial, because provincial does mean in the provinces against an urban center or a gentry center. Um, and I just think that to refer to the provinces as provincial, or to refer to art that exists outside of this international circuit as being provincial, is crazy condescending. There's a lot of really interesting art that comes out of the world at large, and it's just because it's not presented in this clean, austere white cube that is connected through the fair system, through the market system, through advertising systems to these other white cubes around. It's not fair to say that that work is irrelevant if it's not placed in those rooms, because we've seen these things change. You have galleries in Mexico City that open up in a garage, and within 3 years, they're no longer in that garage. They're in a white cube. And in that 3 years, they also go from being outside the market to inside the market. And it's all about how the room that they're in, the institution that they're in, the ritual that they ascribe to is reflected in the production and in the presentation. So it's it it's tricky. So I refrain. The only person I refer to as provincial is myself, and the only ideas that I refer to provincial are mine, because I like to use it as a site of antagonism towards people who think that they are better than the provinces because they live near a lot of white cube gallery spaces. Pick your battles. So there's always this insider outsider thing, and that's what Terry Smith outlines in his text, which I really like. And I guess I should say the one of the final texts that you will read um, is also about the system, the market for Aboriginal Australian art, and it's one that's written in more contemporary terms. It's one that's written in more anthropological terms, and it's going to be this interesting thing for you to see. So we're going to start with the work of Australian Aboriginals, and then we're going to end again with that work in and kind of see the difference between those two things. So um, obviously, the provinces use this as their rubric. If you're not in the provinces, if you're in the little, the smaller shape here, you are informed. You're inside. You're initiated, is the word that I'm going to be using. If you're not, and you exist in those provinces, you are, by all accounts, uninformed. You are uninitiated, and you're kind of irrelevant because of it. What I can say to that end is show your work as many places as possible, but also be really clear about how you want your work presented in those places. So if you want to show your work in a place that isn't a white cube gallery, well, maybe have a conversation about the entirety of the show that you're going to be placed within, just to see if it's going. If are they thinking about it seriously, or are they just happy to be putting artwork in a room? Those are two different things, but we can talk about that later. Um, Now here I have, you can see that obviously the smaller shape says global and the larger shape says regional. That's because the smaller shape here is representative of the collection of all the international white cube galleries versus the larger spread of the regional visual or aesthetic vocabulary. In Maine, the visual and aesthetic vocabulary is landscapes, right? We have a lot of landscapes. They're all over the place. That doesn't mean there isn't artwork here that doesn't ascribe to that stuff. And so the idea of a regional enclave is flawed, but as is the global enclave, because it's not like all the stuff you're going to see in contemporary art fairs or in the contemporary art world is good or interesting or well produced or um, whatever barometer you want to use to say that you don't like something. You're going to find a lot of stuff in the contemporary world that you don't like for whatever reason. Um, a slide with our book. You know the book. So obviously, this course is going to be about, or this section is going to be about the market, right? Obviously, but it's also more than anything. I want you to understand more than follow the rules of the art market. Dissension is always rewarded within avant-garde practices, and avant-garde practices are the backbone of the global art market. You know, if you have a gallery in New York City and you don't have a website, you're deemed cool. If you have a gallery in Portland, Maine, and you don't have a website, you're deemed unprofessional. It's weird. Um, so that's the thing. I'm going to teach you about protest next. So, like, yeah, fuck up the system. Like, that's the easiest way to get attention in the art world, is to actually go, like, understand the system, whatever that system is, whether it's a system of racist politics, understand the system and try to smash it. If it's the network of international art galleries, understand the system and try to smash it, so on and so forth. Um, the other thing you could do is just follow the rules if you want to. If you're hearing this and or reading Veltus's text and you think, like, I actually do want to open a contemporary art space and I do want it to be a white cube and I do want to be represented on Contemporary Art Daily and I do want Hyperallergic to know what I'm up to, cool, go for it. With all my support, I wish you luck. But what the thing you're going to do is you're going to understand the market so much that you're going to make decisions that are reflective of that. You're going to be smarter about it because you understand the structure of it. So um, that's kind of my 1 minute long apology for the drier sections of Olav Veltus's. But the juicy ones where he talks about like people getting divorced and people suing one another, like, yeah, I'll take that. Little like soap opera. Um, and then the other thing is acknowledge personal objectives as a maker and as a researcher. So your core questions are going to actually, whether you like them or not, are going to manifest themselves in your performance within the art market. That's what happens, right? You're not going to be investigating silence in your art studio and then be really, really vocal in the art market. That doesn't happen like that. You're not going to be investigating feminism in your artistic studio and then sleeping your way to the top in the art market. It doesn't work like that. Those two things overlap. They become one and the same. So when you go to New York, when we go to New York and the schedule's all there for you, what you'll see is, or what you're going to be given is essentially a little worksheet. It's a questionnaire called "What is your art market?" And you are going to tour the New York art scene and you're going to think about, okay, do I want my work to be here? Do I not want my work to be here? Would I love for my work to be in this huge gallery, or would it make me so anxious that I would have to sacrifice some of the health pieces that we were talking about when we were discussing entrepreneurship? Something to think about. Um, are you traditional or are you contemporary? Veltus teases those two ideas out. You know, you can be the traditional gallery is one that's really reflected in the Portland art scene. Um, uh, so that's there. A lot of local art scenes or small towns that have art galleries that will sell the landscapes. They'll sell in, say, the Pacific Northwest, the wood carved bear statue. If you haven't been in the Pacific Northwest, there's like 1,000 wood carved bear statues at every roadside little shop, little art gallery. They're art galleries. They are. That's what they are. And it's condescending to say that they're not art because it's in a different place or it looks different. It's a different kind of art. Versus the contemporary. I mean, I've seen your work. I would largely say, I'd say that all of you are contemporary artists, right? Not only are you young and engaged, but you're also making work that's in the vocabulary of the contemporary. So think about the idea of how you value, what you value, but also how you value. So when you like something, do you want to buy it and hold it? Like, I don't know, like people do? Or do you want to um, uh, leave it where it is because it's just too good? You know, like, are you the person who collects rocks from the beach, or are you the person that acknowledges the beauty of the beautiful rocks on the beach and doesn't pick them up because they're fine where they are? So both of those people value the same object, but they perform that valuation in different ways. And lastly, not are you an entrepreneur, think about your entrepreneurial practices. All of us are entrepreneurs to a certain extent because it's the word we are ascribing to a kind of cultural behavior where we want to perform for money under our own terms. Um, dancing for dollars as it is. So we are all have an entrepreneurial practice. What is your practice going to be? How is your practice going to manifest itself? Are you going to look to, like the artist in Terry Smith's text, other people to do the selling because you don't want to engage with the market system, or you don't know of the market system and you might potentially be exploited, as Smith details? Or are you going to just like take the bull by its horns and do your own thing all the time forever? There's a value and a danger in both of those performances. What is it for you? Okay, so I want to get this done in under an hour. Next week, I will be talking to you about more about Velthuse's text. Not next week, in 2 weeks. And I will be showing you contemporary art that negotiates these conversations between entrepreneurship and so on and so forth. But for this time, I just wanted to get through some vocab and really talk at you for some time. I miss you guys. So always, these online classes are awkward. I'm like in my house talking to myself. It's whatever. Um, so I've heard from some of you that you are already knee deep in looking into your artists, I imagine, because you're going to be turning in Venn diagrams by the end of the 29th, Friday today. So you're probably already doing it. I'm assuming since nobody had questions, you all understand the assignment and the structure of the assignment and how it's all going to flow. But I just wanted to talk because this Venn diagramming thing that you're turning in, I'm going to step back for a second. This research paper is placed in this term of this point of your curriculum, in this right now, right? You have to write this paper as kind of a proto thesis. So think about the kinds of questions that you are asking of this artist that you are asked to research. Think about the organization of that research, and think about the cadence of that research as being the almost identical to the structure that you are going to go through when you start to work on your thesis document. In the winter intensive next year, when you're in Portland, you're going to be doing an exercise where you develop Venn diagrams or mind maps of your own practice. And you then turn those Venn diagrams into annotated bibliographies, into thesis statements and outlines, into rough drafts, so on and so forth. Now, I've taken out some of the steps because you're not writing a thesis. It's not 17 pages. It's only 4,000 words. So it's a lighter load. But I wanted to make sure that as many of the potentially the newer research methods and the ones that are the most rigorous or the most necessary are represented here. So the Venn diagram is one where it's a step that not a lot of researchers take, but it's one that's really, really beneficial in the brainstorming phase. So you're right now probably looking at all of the different books or all the different takes that people have taken or held on your artist, right? So Do they think that Niki de Saint Phalle is a feminist, or do they think Niki de Saint Phalle is a postmodernist? What are they saying? Are those two things linked? Are they not linked? So on and so forth. And so what I would like for you to do is, before you read any of those books, just look at them. Make sense of what's in there. You don't, I mean, obviously you're going to need to read some portion of them to understand the methodologies of those authors, but you don't have to read the whole thing yet. You definitely don't need to read it before you do this Venn diagramming. Look at the person's artwork. What's interesting to you? Are you interested in the I don't want to give away too many things for the people that you are researching, because there's a lot of different options. You know, someone like Joseph Beuys has so many different potential reads of his work. So what's the most interesting to you is the one way you can do it. The other way you can do it and involves interest, but it also isn't related to you. What in this person's practice do you think is relative to you and your practice? Now, with that answer in mind, that might be a really good thing to move forward with as far as your research. And that's why I said in the document that details this assignment to make your research count. If you have absolutely no interest in talking about, say, feminism in your work, then it wouldn't be that beneficial for you to write about it in this paper, because you're going to do a lot of research about what that word means, or what those ideas mean, or how they're articulated, how they're argued, who argued them, where they were argued, when they were developed, yada, yada, yada. And that's not going to be applicable to the research that you need to have done in order to produce the master's thesis. So just make it count. It's just that easy. Everything in your graduate school experience should count should like total out at the same thing. You should be researching or honing in your research in a more specific way. And so, as I said when I assigned them, I took a long time making sure that the grim job was making sure that all the artists I assigned were dead. I'm almost positive I got it right. There might be some people who are still alive that are just like so reclusive that I haven't heard anything from them in years. But so that we had that historical distance, so you can see, okay, how is Joseph Beuys presented in the 1960s? How is Joseph Beuys presented now? What does that mean, right? What's the value shift there? Because he was a weirdo when he came to New York City, and now he's a genius. When did that happen? So I kind of lost my train of thought there. I apologize. See, if I was in a classroom, I could just see your faces and ask you, like, what did I just say? Um, um, so that's research. That's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be talking about these people, and it's going to be fabulous. And you're going to do really wonderful things, and making research count. That's what you're talking about. So you're making your research count. And obviously, I'm going to be having this conversation with you. I'm going to look at your Venn diagrams and say, I think you should maybe incorporate this word into your Venn diagram. So none of you are writing about Ellsworth Kelly, and so I will talk about, say, Ellsworth Kelly as my potential research person. Hang on just a second. Okay, so if I were to be doing a paper on Ellsworth Kelly, who RIP, that was a sad day for me, and yeah, so Ellsworth Kelly was esteemed color field painter from the late 1950s through to really till last year, and his works were about color, they were about light, and they were about surface. And so those are the three kind of obvious things. I'm going to look directly at their work. I'm only going to look at their work. What are the things that I'm attracted to in the work? And given the nature of what Ellsworth Kelly was producing, I can see, okay, surface is very important to him because all of his paintings have almost no brushstroke whatsoever. Light is incredibly important because a lot of his early abstractions hinged on the way that the kinds of ways that light interacted with the world around us, how shadows functioned, how negative and positive figure ground conversations were established because of light. And ultimately, he's referred to by history, designated as a color field painter, meaning that color is paramount to his investigation, to his project. And so all of those three things coincide around the idea of vision or optics. It is without vision, or without this simple term, a term that is a little bit bigger than, it's kind of a zoom out from all three of these things, so it kind of hangs up in the distance, looking at these collection of ideas. But vision is the thing that unifies them all, or at least from the purposes of my paper. So with those things in mind, I understand that vision is going to be the thing that unifies my entire text. And so I can begin to look up books that deal with vision and go. And so I'm going to look at books that are vision and color, that are vision and light, and that are vision and surface. I'm going to go through those books, and I'm going to figure out, by only reading the introduction, by skimming the introduction even, if this book is going to be even potentially valuable to me. So if I open the book and it's all about how vision and color function in advertising, I can find some interest there. Cool, I'll go for it. If I pick up the book and it's all about vision and surface, and about how Braille creates a visual language through, or a language based on the surface texture that is a stand-in for a visual language, or a participant in a language network, I'm not going to read that, because it's not relevant to what I'm doing. And so I'll put that book away. And then I find this other book that talks about how the optics of different surface textures function emotionally in our brain. And voila, that's the book I need. I'm going to take that book. And then there's probably one for vision and light. There's a million for vision and light. And then from those books, from that list, that's where my annotated bibliography is going to come in. And for the annotation, what I would like for you to do is write very briefly how you think the book is going to be important for you. You do not need to present me with any quotes. You do not need to present me with any text, any paraphrasing. I would like this in short form, so that I can very quickly read through these and say, I don't think this book is relevant. I'll make a suggestion for you in place of that, if I have one in mind. But I will always have one. I'm not going to just take a book off your list and leave you in a lurch. I'd rather make the suggestion and help you through this process. And so that's where you're moving towards for the annotated bibliography. For those of you who have not ever produced an annotated bibliography, you are producing it in the Chicago style, period. And if you're now wondering, well, what the hell is the Chicago style? In less than 2 minutes, when I shut up, I need you to type into your Google bar Chicago style, and that's it. It's fine. I get fielded this question all the time, and I find it really frustrating. How I don't understand the Chicago style. Okay, great. We live in a world where all human information is networked, and every single college student that has ever produced anything has looked up how to do citations. And so all of those things exist on the internet. If you have questions, look up the Chicago style stuff. That's it, period. I will make notations on your citations on your annotated bibliography. I'm going to use my pen. Actually, I won't. It'll be digital. To tell you that things are wrong and things are right. I'm not going to give you a link or anything to the Chicago style, because I figure it out. You're going to find some that are going to be really awkwardly written, and you're not going to be able to understand them, or you're going to find them that are really generative and fantastic. It's up to you. It's all out there. I'm not trying to be a bully or a meanie or anything like that. I get fielded this question all the time from undergrads, and at a graduate level, you should know how to produce a Chicago style. You should know how to research how to do various kinds of things on the internet. right? So that's all I got, and it's an hour, so work, 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 work. Um, I guess to go over an hour, why not? Um, Once I get these Venn diagrams, I'm going to be sending around a list so that a sign up sheet so that I can schedule phone calls with all of you. Even if you're local, it's easier for us to just have a quick phone call and talk about this stuff as opposed to trying to pin down meetings because we're all really busy people and I can just call you wherever you are if you're in a car or at home or whatnot. So we are going to touch base. I promise. Like I said, I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you have any questions. And that's all I got to say. So, again, work, work,